This class is a survey. We're like going through a lot of books just for like 10 weeks or so. So we're going to be just hitting the high points through this. We're going to be working ahead of where your reading is through the Project 51 effort. But the purpose of this is just to keep everything high level and just survey the span of time here that we're looking at. But we'll start out with prayer. I really, really appreciate everybody praying for Ellie. We talked about that last week. And I know I've felt your support. I know that she feels a lot of support from a lot of people praying for her around the country. And this past week was kind of up and down stuff. She's still been doing the dialysis on her kidneys, but they're still hopeful that those are looking better and going to come back. She had the down part of the week was pulmonary edema, just a lot of fluid on her lungs to the point that she could not breathe, and they had to put her on the breathing machine to force her to breathe. And so that was kind of a kick in the pants for them. They were really discouraged by all of that because she was back in ICU, couldn't see the baby. But the text that I got today from her mom was that she's making progress. The labs are better. She's still fighting the fluid, but she had a better night. And today was a big day. Dialysis, catheter out, walking, and a visit from the baby. So that was a very, very positive thing today. So I just want to praise God for support and answers to prayer that has been felt by her family and all of her friends. Our Heavenly Father, we're so thankful for this day, and we're so thankful for the rain that you are giving to us, and there are so many ways that you bless us and care for us. And when we have a loved one who's struggling and sick, we turn to you, dear Lord, but we also praise you for answers to prayer. We praise you for the way that you have cared for Ellie, and we praise you for the way that you have supported her friends and family. And we're thankful for all the good progress this week, and we pray for complete healing and for her to be able to get better and go home to the baby soon. And Father, we ask you now to help us in the opening of your word, to be inspired by it and see the great things that you've done throughout history. It's in your Son's name we pray. Amen. Okay. We'll start tonight with the way we ended. I just wanted to remind everybody last week of why even studying this is important. We talked about trusting God, and we're inspired by so many of the stories about trusting in God, but specifically, historically, what's so significant about this history that we're studying? What's the main point? You said Jesus. Jesus comes through all of this. Jesus comes through the tribe of Judah. The prophecies were made about the deliverer, the Messiah, coming through Abram's seed. Abram was promised this land that they are taking now from the Canaanites, and its significance is in that. Abram believed God, and it was reckoned to him as righteousness. And it's such a central story to the Bible and to our relationship with God, the emphasis on righteousness. The emphasis on believing God is so paramount, because look at all of the things that God took the people through because of his faithfulness to Abraham, because of Abraham's belief, because of his righteousness. He brought them through the Exodus. He brought them through the wilderness wandering. He leads them into Canaan and turns over the land to them. He deals with them through the period of the judges of, lots of good times and bad times. He's with them during the United Kingdom and then the divided kingdom, and then the captivities, and then the return, the rise of Phariseeism, and all the sects that developed from the Israelites. God was faithful to these people because of Abraham and because of that belief that Abraham put in him. And that's the whole basis of what he's doing here and where he's going. And the fact that his son is going to be introduced to the world through these people that we're studying about. And this is all planning the path for that and planning the way for that. So we should never lose sight of that when we're studying these things. And so I wanted to, I forgot to pray also. Man, I was almost in a car accident on the way over here. It was like, that's the closest that I've come in a long time. I was coming down Fairview, and this guy did not stop coming out of the street between Sheldon's Pharmacy and I forget what's right there. Just didn't stop, just rolled right through. He was looking over here, pulled out. I was going to hit him, and he sped up and got out of my way, and I was moving at a pretty fast clip to get here on time. So I'm not going to blame him because I've done that before, and I was also driving a little too fast, and it was wet, and I put my brakes on, and I did not stop. But thankfully, he pulled on out in front of me there. My legs were still shaking a little bit from it, but it was very close. It was a hairline miss. I meant to pray about that as well, but I forgot. But I want to talk a little bit about this literature that we read. I was reminded of something when we read through Judges about reading through Ezra and Nehemiah, which we're going to end on in this class. And one of the things I picked up on years ago studying Ezra and Nehemiah is the fact that literature from this time period is different from literature today and in our culture and the way our brains work. And our brains just work different from the way I think the writers of this time thought. And I want to paint this picture because I think it would be helpful for you not only in reading Judges but also other things that we're going to read throughout this. And this is just my own conclusion about it. I don't even know if I'm right about this. I've seen differing approaches to interpreting timelines and the order of things happening in the Bible. But one thing that I noticed in Ezra and Nehemiah is, the big struggle with it is the timeline of it. Because if you look at it with our modern mind, the 20th century people who wrote commentaries and things like that, we tend to look at things in a beginning, middle, and end. Yeah, linear, thank you. A linear approach. And so if we're going to write a letter to someone or we're going to write a story, typically, even in all the movies that we go to see today and the books that we read, typically it's like day one. This happened, and then this happened, and then this happened. And you just kind of lay it out like that, and you introduce the characters in the order. But what you have with a lot of these writings is the Jewish writers did not approach it like that. It was perfectly fine to go and tell one story about what happened on Wednesday, and then go over here and talk about something that happened on Monday. And then you could talk about something that happened with that person's grandchild, which would have been in the future. And then you can go back to something that happened, 20 years ago when they entered the land of Canaan. And bouncing around in the timelines is just more common in what you read during this time period. And it's just a different way of telling the story. I start out talking about the middle. And then I mention the beginning, and I mention the end, and I go back to the middle, and then I talk about the beginning some more. And so you have to catch that, and you have to be mindful of that the order of things don't follow that linear path that sometimes our minds try to force people to do. Has anybody else noticed that? Is that something that you've ever seen? Yeah. Yeah. Right. Mm-hmm. Your chronological reading, did it jump around like that? Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Chronological Bible, even a book, it's jumbled.
Yeah.
And history, Old Testament history was told not as an accurate
A narrative.
narrative.
Yeah.
So, I like those.
Yeah. And I think that's us, right? It's like we try to force everything into the way we think about it because that's the way we were taught and that's the way we tell things. But it hasn't always been that way, and it won't always be that way. I think I just gave up. Yeah, that's the easiest thing. It's the easiest thing to do is just to not track it.
Our obsession with a timeline is a really new thing in history.
Yeah. Yeah, right. And I'm sure there are reasons why. I'm sure I studied them in college, but I don't remember what the reasons were about the thinking of that. But yeah, thoughts and manners of thinking change over time. And so you can't always try to force everything into the way you want it to be. So that's going to help us with Judges. It helps you with Ezra and Nehemiah also, and I'll mention some of that later when we get there. But let's start with chapter 1, verse 1, because that's what my mind tells me to do with Judges. And I want to read through a few things here. I've got a couple of maps. Oh, actually, you know what? Let me go ahead and show you. Oh, this isn't on yet. There we go. There we go. So we're in this period of time now where we've been looking at Joshua, and this happens over a 25-year period of time in conquering the different cities that we've read some about in Joshua. And then we get introduced to the period of the judges. And here are the 15 judges that rose up in the land during this time. And you'll notice there's some overlap. I guess that's another thing about not thinking in terms of it being linear. You know, when you're a child and you're going through these stories of the judges, you think that it's the people were unfaithful, a judge rose up, and then they were faithful, and then the judge goes away, and then they're unfaithful, and then another judge rises up, and it's just one by one by one. That's the way I always thought about it as a child. But there's a lot of overlap between the judges. There were multiple judges around at the same time, and that's something you miss when you just study them one by one in children's classes and whatnot. And so during this time period, multiple judges were risen up by God. And then the other thing that's notable is if you just look geographically at where the judges were located, you've got Shamgar up there, you've got Deborah right there, you've got Gideon there, you've got Jephthah there, you've got Othniel down here, Samson over here. So geographically, they're spread out all over the place. And so, it's not the type of thing where it's like there's one judge influencing everybody. It's kind of a regional thing too, because you might have had a problem in North Carolina, and a leader rises up in North Carolina and is influential in that region, but at the same time, a leader rises up in Wyoming and is influencing the people from that region. And that doesn't mean that the people in those different geographies don't hear about what's going on and aren't influenced by the actions of these judges around the nation. But I think it's really kind of interesting that God positioned so many of these leaders in a very seemingly, distributed fashion. And as I said, there's overlap that happens with that as well. So that's the influence of the judges across the nation during this time that we're reading about in this book. So I want to start with chapter 1, verse 1. And it says, after the death of Joshua, the Israelites asked the Lord, who will be the first to go up and fight for us against the Canaanites? The Lord answered, Judah is to go. I have given the land into their hands. Then the men of Judah said to the Simeonites, their brothers, come up with us into the territory allotted to us to fight against the Canaanites. We in turn will go with you into yours. So the Simeonites went with them. When Judah attacked, the Lord gave the Canaanites and Perizzites into their hands, and they struck down 10,000 men at Bezek. It was there that they found Adoni-Bezek and fought against him, putting to rout the Canaanites and Perizzites. Adoni-Bezek fled, but they chased him and caught him and cut off his thumbs and big toes. And the story here goes that he had done this to 70 kings, and they were picking up scraps under his table, and so now God has paid him back for what he did to them. And they brought him to Jerusalem, and he died there. The men of Judah attacked Jerusalem also and took it. They put the city to the sword, and they set it on fire. We looked last week at this was a way that they raised the cities. They would take them over, and they would put it to fire. That Hazor fire was one of the most intense fires because of the amount of supplies that were there, and it was really a hot fire that turned bricks into glass that we found in some of the archaeological digs. After that, the men of Judah went down to fight against the Canaanites living in the hill country, the Negev, and the western foothills. They advanced against the Canaanites living in Hebron and defeated Sheshai, Ahiman, and Talmai. From there they advanced against the people living in Debir. And Caleb said, I will give my daughter, Aksha, in marriage to the man who attacks and captures Kiriath Sefer. Othniel, son of Kenaz, Caleb's younger brother, took it, so Caleb gave his daughter Aksha to him in marriage. So Caleb's nephew, who's Othniel, who's going to be one of the judges that we read about here in this book, right? He's the nephew, and so he defeats, and then he gets his uncle's daughter, which is his first cousin. Yes, that's what it was. One day when she came to Othniel, she urged him to ask her father for a field. When she got off her donkey, Caleb asked her, what can I do for you? She replied, do me a special favor. Since you have given me land in the Negev, give me also springs of water. Then Caleb gave her the upper and lower springs. The descendants of Moses' father-in-law, the Kenite, went up from the city of palms with the men of Judah to live among the people of the desert of Judah in the Negev near Arad. Then the men of Judah went with the Simeonites, their brothers, and attacked the Canaanites living in Zephath, and they totally destroyed the city. Therefore it was called Hormah. The men of Judah also took Gaza, Ashkelon, and Ekron, each city with its territory. So I wanted to read those first 18 verses just to kind of get us ramped back up again here, because this is the story of after Joshua died, and now Judah kind of takes the lead, and Othniel emerges as a battle-tried warrior, and there are continued efforts to take over the land. As I said earlier, it's a timeline of about 25 years when this stuff is going on. And so there's still conquering to do, and this is after Joshua has died. But now we start to see some trouble, because in Joshua we saw a lot of success at the beginning. Some trouble comes there in the book of Joshua, if you've read about some of that. And now it says in verse 19, the Lord was with the men of Judah. They took possession of the hill country, but they were unable to drive the people from the plains because they had iron chariots. And so let's talk about this for a minute. The plains are over here. I think it refers to them as coastal people here in a little bit. But that's down here. And this is where Othniel is, and a lot of that action that we're going to talk about tonight is happening in this neck of the woods here. But it said, how did it say it again? They were unable to drive the people out of the plains. And so who are those people? They are the Philistines, more than likely. And we know from archaeological evidence that this is now the start of the Iron Age, and the Philistines were makers and users of iron. And it says they were unable to drive the people from the plains because they had iron chariots. So I want to sit on this for a minute and maybe we'll get some conversation going. I'd love to hear what you think. We'll just take a little pause and let some people share their thoughts about this, because you come across this verse and you're like, what? God just caused the walls to fall down of Jericho. God is able to do anything. And so why were the people unable to drive out the Philistines? Because they had iron chariots. What's that all about? How do you reconcile that? How do you respond to that?
First, yes, they didn't ask him. Seriously.
Okay. So they didn't ask him. God wasn't really hands-on right now. He was an absent manager. He had left. He'd left the stewardship to these people, and he went on a trip. Right. He comes back. He's like, why are these iron chariots parked in the parking lot? Yeah.
So this was probably written 900 years after the event.
Yeah.
So the guess is that some of this was written to recognize the reality that these people still survive. Now, the Philistines, people in Jerusalem, other areas were not vanquished. So how do we square that with take the land and kill everybody? Well, we did.
Right. And this is where exactly I wanted to go with it. I'm glad that you said it that way, because that's what I think it is. I think this is just a big fat excuse, right? It's like, well, we didn't drive the people out. The Lord said that we were going to, and whatever. But now, what's the reason? Well, they had chariots, and these nomadic tribal people didn't seem to have trouble with chariots and other types of weapons, in other situations, because they've got the Lord on their side. And so this is just a big fat excuse. This is like Ray's saying, looking back and going, well, we have to document this somehow in the history of what happened. And here we are living amongst these people, and we haven't driven out all of our enemies. And we've got, we'll read some more here about the failure. But, it's just a mental excuse. And I'm sorry, go ahead. Well, it's back and forth. Back and forth, back and forth, yeah. And so, I'm not up here saying that I haven't done this, because I have. But it gets on my nerves whenever I do doubt God, because that happens to me from time to time. It gets on my nerves when I forget about God, because I do that, from time to time. And it bothers me when I get this language in my mouth of, I can't, it's not possible, all these things that just get planted in our mind. And, with my kids, I've got 3 boys, so I'm always trying to train to this thing. Whenever I hear, I can't, it's not possible, you're trying to shake them out of it and say, it is possible. You have to believe, you have to have confidence, you have to be bold, you have to be courageous. All these things that God taught Joshua about being. And it's really your stinking thinking, as they say, is what's holding you back from accomplishing great things. Right.
Psalm 27, I just turned there.
Yes. Psalm 27. Some trust in horses, some trust in chariots. But yeah. So yeah, that's the whole thing. So I just wanted to sit on that for a minute and just for us to remind ourselves about what we can take out of this and use today for us. And that is, it's true about positive thinking. And it's true about hitching your wagon to the Lord, because He's the one that makes positive thinking so powerful, because He has given us this capacity for great accomplishment and great things. And we hold ourselves back when we say, I can't, or I'm weak, or whatever.
I won't hear you say this about crying, but you have to hear this. This week, everybody in here knows me, knows this is phenomenal. This week, I have started saying, and I had it written around my house, I've started saying, my mind is clear, my body is well, I have a good life. I've been saying those three things over and over and over. I see it in my bathroom mirror, I see it in the kitchen, on my calendar, I have it some other place. I've had to do that. I've had to do that.
And the three things again are, say it again.
My mind is clear.
My mind is clear.
My body is well.
My body is well.
My life is good.
My life is good. And saying those things and believing those things and crediting it to the Lord and making it about Him and not us, it's so important. I've always by default been a positive thinking person, but that's where the devil attacks me. The devil attacks me on putting negative thoughts in my mind and starting to make me doubt. Things like that. But by default, I've been a positive person. I remember, and I get real worked up too, like when somebody tells me I can't do something, that's when I say, yes, we can. I told you the story last week about yes, we can, with Bob the Builder. That became a little slogan that we use internally to keep us from being negative with the client. And I remember one time, my dad he was getting on up there in years, and he and I had a mutual interest in baseball. And I wanted to do something special for him, and I had arranged this trip. We were going to fly into New York, and we were going to do 3 baseball games in 2 days and fly back. Well, wouldn't you know it, the first baseball game was on September 19th, 2001. And it turned out that was the first day that the planes were flying. And so Dad was like, I'm not sure that I want to get involved in that. And I was like, I don't really want to either. But what was disappointing was the tickets that we had for that night were at Shea Stadium. Well, that was the night that Whitney Houston sang. That was the first ball game back after baseball had been off. They had used Shea Stadium as a morgue for that past week. And so they were going to have this big ceremony, and baseball was going to be back, and we had tickets to that. But we were both kind of like, don't want to go to the airport, because things were very uncertain, So we didn't do it. And so I was trying to come up with something different. And so I heard this ad that they were having an auction for dinner with the Atlanta Braves. Now, my dad and I, we loved the Atlanta Braves, and he watched every game. I was not watching as much at that phase of my life. I had small children, but I told Ann and a friend of mine. Ann's very negative, by the way. And I told Ann and a friend of mine, I was like, I'm gonna get this auction and have dinner with the Atlanta Braves, and Dad and I are gonna go. And Ann and the friend were just like, you're not going to get that, don't waste your time. I was like, yes, I'm going to get it. I'm going to go figure out, And they're like, you're not going to do it. So as soon as they told me that, then I had to do it. And so I did get it. And so we had dinner with John Smoltz and Tom Glavine and Greg Maddox and Chipper Jones. And it was awesome. And just a great memory. One of those monument moments that we talked about last week. But anyway, you can accomplish great things when you believe it. And so this was just an excuse, Well, they had chariots, so we weren't able to do it. And so then the Benjamites in verse 21 failed to dislodge the Jebusites who were living in Jerusalem. To this day, the Jebusites live there with the Benjamites. I think the Jebusites are still there. If you go to Jerusalem, where are the Jebusites? Oh, they're right over there. But they didn't dislodge them, and these are now the stories of the failures that were a result of the people not believing and not following through on what God instructed them to do. In verse 28, of chapter 1. It says, "When Israel became strong, they pressed the Canaanites into forced labor, but never drove them out completely. Nor did Ephraim drive out the Canaanites living in Gezer, but the Canaanites continued to live there among them. Neither did Zebulun drive out the Canaanites living in Kitron or Nahalal, who remained among them, but they did subject them to forced labor. Nor did Asher drive out those living in Akko or Sidon or Alab or Akzib or these other places that are mentioned. And because of this, the people of Asher lived among the Canaanite inhabitants of the land. Neither did Naphtali drive out those living in Beth Shemesh or Beth Anath, but the Naphtalites too lived among the Canaanite inhabitants of the land and those living in those places." So it just goes on and on here, explaining that they didn't drive out the enemies, and they're still there. They may have forced them into some labor, but they never completely drove them out the way the Lord wanted them to. And so that was a failure of the people. I wanted to show a picture here from, as I mentioned last week, I'm a member of the Biblical Archaeological Society. If you would like to join, you would have to talk to me and get sponsorship, recommendation from a current member. But this is a bronze bull that was found by an Israeli soldier. And this soldier was perched on a high place. He was on a ridge, and he had been placed there to be a guard and to be, on recon. I don't know, whatever they do. And I'm sure it's a very boring, solitary thing for this soldier to be out there. And so he's just kind of kicking rocks around and not realizing that he's actually standing on one of the high places that we read about in the Bible. Because he brings this bull back, and they start looking at it, and they start looking at the dating of it, and they realize that this bull is from the period of the Judges. And so they excavate the area where the soldier had found this, and they discover an area that's 4 feet long and 3 feet high, and it's a stone altar. And it was the center of an Israelite cultic site after the Exodus. And near this standing stone, the bull figurine was found. In the same area, archaeologists uncovered a folded bronze sheet that may have been an Egyptian-style mirror and a squared pottery fragment that may have been the corner of an incense burner. And so it was one of these altars that was placed at a high point where an idol was there, and it's that remnant of what the people had failed to do. They had failed to drive out all the people from the area, and they had failed to rid the area of this, and worse yet, started worshiping the idols, and made the Lord angry about that. I forgot that I had this picture. I meant to talk about this earlier when we were talking about the reasons why they didn't conquer the areas. This is a tablet that they found, and this is from the mid-14th century, and this was found in Hebron. And this is where the prince of Hebron tells the king that he stands alone and needs a large force to rescue him. And these tablets that were found were written in the Babylonian language, and it was the diplomatic language of the day. And there were a lot of these letters sent to these outside areas, and they describe the deterioration of the Canaanite cities and the need for reinforcements and help and armament and all that. And it indicates the shape of the Canaanite cities in the days of Joshua and the Judges, because the time was right. The Lord had made the time right for the Israelites to overtake this land. They were in a weakened condition. They weren't well fortified, except for walls and things like that. They were asking for help in defending themselves. But the time was right, but the Israelites, didn't follow through with that all the way. So that was something that I wanted to show. All right, so now let's move into chapter 2 of Judges. And this is where we enter a little time travel tube here to go to a different time, because now all of a sudden in chapter 2, Joshua is alive. Judges 1 is when after Joshua has died. But Joshua 2 now is about before this. So you have to put this in front of chapter 1 because it's a different time frame. And I want to come back to the idea of this narrative that's being shared here. So in chapter 2 it says, the angel of the Lord went up from Gilgal to Bochum and said, I brought you up out of Egypt and led you into the land that I swore to give to your forefathers. I said, I will never break my covenant with you, and you shall not make a covenant with the people of this land, but you shall break down their altars. Yet you have disobeyed me. Why have you done this? Now therefore I tell you that I will not drive them out before you. They will be thorns in your sides, and their gods will be a snare to you. When the angel of the Lord had spoken these things to all the Israelites, the people wept aloud, and they called that place Bochum. There they offered sacrifices to the Lord. And so there's this moment of repentance here when the angel comes and tells them this, and he's the one who tells them that, yeah, I'm not going to drive these people out. These gods are going to be a snare to you, and this is going to be a reminder. It's going to be that thorn in the flesh to remind you of your disobedience to the Lord. And so this is where it says, after Joshua had dismissed the Israelites, they went to take possession of the land, each to his own inheritance. The people served the Lord throughout the lifetime of Joshua and of the elders who outlived him, and who had seen all the great things the Lord had done for Israel. And so my point on this verse here is, you can't replace experience. You know, you have to develop experience. I'm always trying to take all of my experiences and place them on my 3 sons. You know, I'm always like, now when I was in school and I was facing this is what happened to me, and this is the lesson I learned, so let me save you from this, And now when your mom and I got married, we had this challenge and this and that, and and they look at me like, yeah. And so I try to be patient and realize that, they're going to have to go through their own experiences. And they're going to have to stub their toe, because the only reason that I got my ability to budget and pay off debt and, save and give and invest and all those things, it took years of struggling with the hardship. And it was the pain that made me learn, that, this is a better way. And so when you go to somebody who hasn't experienced that pain yet, it's kind of hard to say, don't do that, because they're going to go, why not? I haven't experienced the pain yet, so should they listen to their wise father? Yes. Will they listen? No. And so they have to have the experience of it. And so the people who had lived through the lifetime of Joshua, they had seen the crossing of the Jordan. They had seen the falling of the walls of Jericho. They had seen what the Lord did for them. And they had this influence on the people that was significant. And after they were gone, then the people who were left didn't have that influence. And so the lesson for us is that there are people amongst us who have had experiences. That's what's so wonderful about a church family, is that in a group, especially the size that we have here, there's somebody who has been through what you're going through. And the reminder of seeking those people out and, going and asking them for advice and experience, that's very valuable to learn that, because you don't want to have to repeat all the same mistakes. And so this idea of experience and leadership and influence is something that we should embrace and go to. George calls me all the time. He takes me to breakfast because he wants to ask, my opinion on things. And he wants me to instruct him. And I'm happy to do that. I'm happy. I'm writing a binder of instruction for George. I'm putting tabs on it. I'm like, if this, go to tab 7. And then, so he's doing great. He loves it. You cherish it. Yes. It's time to cherish.
It also behooves the person who's experienced to talk about it.
Yeah.
So they will know who to ask.
I forgot. I was talking to all old people, and I'm not. And so I forgot. Thank you for the reminder. Don't close your, I need to say different things. Don't close yourself off from the young people. Make yourself available. Talk to them, interact with them, invite them over. Seriously, when's the last time you invited a young couple over to your home? When's the last time you did that? Because there are a ton of young couples here who right now are struggling with the same things that you struggled with in raising children, in marriage, all of that, and you should have them over. When's the last time, Jennifer?
I had somebody over that wasn't going to my church. I did my 3
Oh,
things.
good.
And what I wanted to say is David was a man of God because when he fought a country, he killed everybody.
Yeah.
And that's what God said to do.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like David listened to God.
Yes.
And look how he got.
David was a warrior, and that's what God used him for. But I think that is important, to remember to reach out to those people. When Ann and I first got married, I was 21, she was 20, and there were like 2 or 3 couples at the church where we went that I was shocked they were still alive, frankly. I don't know. It's funny thinking back. But they would invite us to lunch after church, and they would invite us over to their home. And, looking back, that was very, very valuable, and that was very important. And we never would have approached them. We never would have said, hey, can we go to lunch today? But they reached out, and they shared their experience with us. Now, I'm starting to get some of that because my nephew asked me recently, he was like, do you remember how old you were at my wedding? And I was like, yes, I remember. And he said, yeah, that's how old I am now. And I was like, so? And he was like, that's really old, And I was like, it is? It was a kind of a crazy thing there for me. But just the look on his face of just sheer horror. But anyway, experience is hard to replace. And when it's gone, you'll wish that you had it. Okay, so I want to look at chapter 2, verse 11. Then the Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord and served the Baals. They forsook the Lord, the God of their fathers, who had brought them out of Egypt. They followed and worshipped various gods of the peoples around them. They provoked the Lord to anger because they forsook him and served Baal and the Ashtoreths. And let me just continue to read this. In his anger against Israel, the Lord handed them over to raiders who plundered them. He sold them to their enemies all around, whom they were no longer able to resist. Whenever Israel went out to fight, the hand of the Lord was against them to defeat them, just as he had sworn to them. They were in great distress. Then the Lord raised up judges who saved them out of the hands of these raiders. And so this is kind of a overarching statement about what this book is about, because now you're going to start reading throughout this book about the individual stories of the judges and the things that the judges did in leading the people and returning them to the way of the Lord. This is a way of just kind of summarizing what's going on here, is that the people left the Lord and they were plundered, and then the Lord rose up these judges to save them. And so that's the story you're about to read about. You're about to read about Othniel and Ehud and all these other judges throughout this book, which we're not going to talk about tonight. But I want to talk a little bit about leadership and some ideas there. First of all, that's another thing I wanted to show. Forgot about this. This was a wall that had an engraving of the Philistines fighting against the Egyptians, and you can't really see very well in that picture, but the Philistines had a navy. They had boats, and the Egyptians had a navy, and so this is a scene of a naval battle, and so these were the people that weren't driven out, and they had the iron chariots, and they had a navy, and there's documentation about that presence of the Philistines in that area. Everybody knew who they were and referred to them as the coastal plain people and the sea people. But I want to talk a little bit about leadership, because when you read about these judges, I want you to look at what are the qualities of this person. One thing that I have learned in my life is that, I read those fruits of the Spirit and sing the fruits of the Spirit song and all that, and I'm just like, oh man, I can't, just when I think I have this one, then I'm working on this one, then this one falls, and I have to work on that. And so I've kind of come to the conclusion that we're all very different people. We all have our ways that God made us, and we all have our strengths and weaknesses. Some people are good leaders, some aren't. Some are humble, some aren't. And so you really have to find your qualities, your talents, and use them for the Lord. And I went through this in my work, and this was a little test that helped me to understand who I am and what's going on in my dynamic with people who work for me. And so we all took this. And the reason we took it was because when I started hiring people, I was a one-man band for a while, and then when I started hiring people, the way I ran the company was I would get everybody together and I would say, what does everybody want to do? And people would share their opinions, and I would go, that's great, and we would talk about it, and I would try to do things that everybody wanted to do, and I was trying to be a pleaser of the people. And the reason I was trying to be a pleaser of the people was because of this element of my personality right here, which is an I. And the I stands for interactive and interpersonal and all those things. And so anybody who knows me, I love to be on a stage. I love to be the center of attention. I love to be the life of the party. I love to make people laugh. And I want to please. I want to be a people pleaser. And when you're running a company, that doesn't like people loved me. People loved me. Oh, Joseph, he's so nice. He's so funny. He's always trying to help us and all this stuff, until I was angry about something. And then they're like, what got into Joseph, And so that's why I was acting that way, was that I. And so the thing that got my attention about this personality profile was the D. And the D is domineering and dictatorial and decisive. And did I say domineering? And so I am a 99D naturally. I make very quick decisions. One of the things about me and Ann is that Ann is like an 80-something S. And the S is the golden retriever. It's the one, let's check everybody's opinions, and let's make sure everybody's okay, and let's, make sure that there's peace and tranquility everywhere. And we would lose our minds when we would go into McDonald's, because we would be in line and we would get to the front of the line, and I would say, yes, I'd like a number 1 large with a Coke. And then I would go like this, and she would go, let's see, I think I will have, what did you get? What do you like? Oh, that sounds good. What are people doing? Oh, I like that shirt that you have. And I'm just like, will you order the meal? We've been in here 50,000 times, and we would get in this big argument every time. And I finally learned it was because of this. I'm decisive, and she's not. And so this over here is the adaptive score, And what that means is when people are watching you, what do you do with your D? And so because of this, I didn't want people to think I was a jerk. And so I would do this all the time, and I would let people just kind of walk all over me, and I would let people do things. But when you live in this area right here, you're extremely stressed. And so I was stressed at work all the time because I wasn't being who God made me to be. And when we did this, I finally learned the lesson that the people that worked with me needed me to be this. They like this, but we will go hungry if that's who I am when I show up to work. And so they needed this. And so when I learned this, I found this glorious lion head that I put on my desktop of my computer so that I could stare at it every day. And I was just reminding myself that God made me to be a leader. He made me to be domineering and decisive and direct, and I'm going to embrace that, and I'm going to be that to His honor and glory, because the people who work for me are dying for me to be that way, and people need that type of person in their life. Otherwise, they never finish the order, and they never actually get the Big Mac meal and get to enjoy it. And so I started being that way, and it was amazing. When I embraced this, I started noticing that the people who worked for me relaxed a little bit. And I started setting the course the way these leaders that I read about in the Bible do. This is what we're going to be. This is where we're going. No, we're not doing that. And that's fine if I'm right, wrong or right or whatever, but people need direction and they need a course of action. And so I started embracing that. And, I never wanted to fire anybody because I was like, the high I was like, they have a family, and what are they going to do if they don't work for me? They're never going to find another job. I have to employ them. But the first time I fired the person who was the problem, all these people started working harder because they were like, thank you for firing that person. We've been waiting for you to do that. That's right, or it might be. But it's a very healthy thing. And so I think leadership is very, very important. From the moment that I discovered this and started working on it and thinking about it, if you read John Maxwell's stuff and stuff like that, they're all principles from Scripture. And you will especially find them in the leaders in this book of Judges. And that's what I want you to think about when you're reading about these judges. Who were they? What were their strengths? What were their weaknesses? And too often we're waiting for somebody else to be a leader. Somebody should change that. Somebody should do something about that. Oh, the church needs this. The church needs that. The world needs this. We're down on this thing that's happening and that thing. But really what the issue is, what we need to ask ourselves in the mirror is, why am I not a leader? Because God has given me qualities. Even Anne, with her ridiculous high S, is a great leader. She's not decisive and she's not domineering and things like that, but she carries credibility and I'm struggling with the words right now, but all of us within us have these leadership qualities that we see from the judges, and we need to embrace that, and we need to be leaders because the people needed that very much. I pulled out a few things that I just want to walk through with you that I think are the things that you will see when you read about the judges in this book. Some of them I think were very inspired, and sometimes you have a leader who is inspired. It's just somebody who just seems to know and seems to see what's going on, and they've got that quality of being able to call it the way that it is and say the right thing and do the right thing. And some of you have that quality within you to be an inspired leader. We'll certainly see that can anybody think of a judge that you would say was one of the judges who was inspired? Deborah. Okay, Deborah. Okay, passionate. This is the one I like, because Anne is always telling me to calm down. And I'm like, no, I don't need to calm down. And I grabbed the thing. There's lots of people in the Bible who were passionate and they were over the top. And this is what I love about prophets. You know, I tell my people sometimes that I'm a what is it, Nathan, I say when I do, like when I took the signs to the basketball game? It's a, hold on, I'm going to get this. It's when the prophets, it's like when Jeremiah would do the stuff that he would do and Elijah would do the stuff. Does it have poetry in the name of it? Do you know what I'm talking about? Okay, hold on. No, just forget. We're going down a wrong road now. I'll think of it later and have Vicky email it out to everybody. But anyway, I like to do things for effect. I like to show them, I like to show them rather than just tell them. And so a lot of the leaders in the Bible and the judges especially, you'll see them to be very passionate people. They have passion about what they are. And one of the leaders that I admire is Dave Ramsey. And I read a blog entry one time of a guy who had worked there for several years and he was taking another job another day. And he said, the thing that I hate to leave about this organization is that every week when we have our company devotion, Dave reads a letter from someone who their life has been changed because of our mission. And Dave's eyes start to well up and his voice starts to shake. And it's hard to replace a leader like that who has such passion. And you'll see that God puts that in a lot of people. Leaders are curious. Leaders, they don't sit back and just accept the status quo. You'll see in some of these judges that you read about is that they're willing to go into the unknown. They're willing to face a challenge. They're willing to inquire about something, inquire about what the Lord is doing. They wonder about what's going on, and it's one of those things that drives you as someone who's leading other people. I think tenacious is a word that describes a lot of these judges. They stood in the face of discouragement and negativity, and they're tenacious in their actions. And that serves as a good example for people. And we've got disciplined, we've got confident, we've got courageous, we've got principled, and we've got selfless. Those were the last qualities that I thought of when I thought of the different qualities of the judges, because they're different people, but God raised them all up for specific reasons, specific purposes, and God can use you too. Thank you very much for coming tonight. We will see you next week.